John McTiernan's 1987 film Predator is one of the most iconic science fiction films of the last 30 years. It's so iconic that it's redundant to even call it iconic at this point. And in the corporate age of Hollywood that we're currently experiencing, no icon can be left untouched. Studios have to capitalize on its popularity to try to get as much money as possible. So obviously, they made several Predator sequels that all failed to recapture what audiences loved about the original. Predator 2 had some interesting ideas, but it ultimately failed to be a worthy sequel. And the Alien vs. Predator movies are so bad that no one even likes to remember them. The latest effort to cash in on the franchise was The Predator, which, being directed by Shane Black, had the greatest potential to restore the franchise to its roots. But I guess fate decided that the world wasn't ready for another good Predator movie because it was awful, and hands down, the worst Predator movie that has ever been made outside of the AVP movies. As a Predator fan, it's really disappointing to see this once iconic Alien franchise get further humiliated after every miserable sequel, spin-off, and reboot that fails to respect its roots. After the 2018 disaster, the hope for ever getting another decent Predator movie is basically gone at this point. But what if I told you that we already had another decent Predator movie? What if there was a Predator sequel that expanded upon the Alien lore in a natural way while respecting the roots of the original and being passably entertaining to boot? That Predator sequel exists. It's been right under our noses for almost 10 years. I'm of course talking about the 2010 movie, Predators. Predators, despite what some people will tell you, is a sequel and not a reboot to the original. It follows a motley crew of soldiers after they wake up in a mysterious jungle with no memory of how they got there. Little do they know they're actually on an alien planet designed specifically by the Predators as a hunting ground. A lot of people, and even a good number of Predator fans, think this movie sucks, and honestly, I do not agree. In fact, I'd say this is the second best Predator movie. But before I start digging myself a hole by defending this movie, let me address a few things. First off, when this movie came out, I was obsessed with it as a kid. I had already seen the original Predator and I loved it. I could not wait to see more of this franchise. So when I saw Predator 2 in both AVP movies, I was disappointed to say the least. Then I saw Predators, and I thought it was the coolest movie in the entire world. I watched this movie probably 50 times in the span of a year, so I do have a nostalgic attachment to this movie, and I've always had fond memories of it. But recently, I wanted to see if those memories held up. I'm usually not one to let nostalgia get in the way when judging a piece of media, so there was a good chance that rewatching this movie could have turned me into another naysayer. But it didn't, and I can still confidently say that this is the best Predator sequel. Obviously, it's not a perfect movie, and now that I'm older, I can see its flaws a lot more clearly. Half the time, the dialogue is really awful, and the first act of the movie moves way too slow. Whereas the original had an energy to it that kept it engaging before we get to the first action scene, Predators lacks that same fun energy, and as a result, it can really feel dull at times. It also takes way too long for the characters to figure out they're on an alien planet. Hell, we never even encounter a Predator until 38 minutes into the movie. And on top of all that, the story doesn't even come to a conclusion by the end of the movie. It ends on a cliffhanger where the surviving protagonists are still trying to find a way off the planet. And despite what I hoped as a naive 13-year-old, we will never get to see how they get off the planet. Yet, despite all of these obvious flaws, I love this movie. It's one of my favorite movies, and I think it's a good Predator sequel. Predators is able to do what no other Predator sequel has been able to in the past. It stayed true to its roots without becoming a parody of the original, it expanded the lore in a way that wasn't ludicrous, and it had an entertaining cast of characters to boot. The characters have always been a big reason for me liking this movie, but I can see why people would hate them. They're not especially developed, and you don't really get attached to any of them. Like the original, they're a team of soldiers in a jungle, but unlike the original, there's no macho camaraderie because none of these people know each other, and they spend more time fighting with each other than actually working together. Despite all of this, I think the characters in this movie are thoroughly entertaining to watch, and part of that has to do with the cast. This movie stars Adrian Brody, Topher Grace, Walton Goggins, Danny Trejo, and Lawrence Fishburne. Mahershala Ali is also in this movie, a fact that I've only now realized as I'm editing this video, and I don't know how I didn't catch this when I was rewatching the movie. This is probably the best cast for a Predator movie since the original, and it really helps elevate this movie. Now, some people really hated Adrien Brody in this role as an ex-Special Ops soldier, but I think he's fine. His performance doesn't bother me at all, and it works. Sure, he pales in comparison to someone like Arnie, but I don't think that necessarily takes away any of the merits of his performance here. The rest of the stars I mentioned are playing really entertaining characters that are all set up by fantastic introductory scenes. I mean, just look at Walton Goggins' introduction.
Ah, you motherfucker! Ah, come on, you motherfucker!
It's hilarious. The character introductions are really entertaining, and they probably wouldn't have been without the great cast. Alice Braga is basically the Michelle Rodriguez of this movie, and she does a good job being a badass female action character. Lawrence Fishburne, hands down, gives the best performance in the movie as a survivor who has completely lost his mind. The only characters I don't like are Nikolai, who I can't even understand half the time.
How was it to Chechnya?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
People in Afghanistan.
I'm sorry, that wasn't very clear. Can you say that one more time?
People in Afghanistan.
Oh my god, I can't fucking hear you! And I don't really care much for this guy either. But thankfully, their roles in the movie are minimal. Sure, the dialogue in this movie is terrible, but it allows actors like Trejo and Goggins to have some amazingly stupid lines. Like when they're trying to figure out where they're at and Trejo gets all serious and says,
This is hell.
oh my god, it makes me laugh every time. Goggins is hilarious in this movie as an escaped convict. If you like black humor, you're gonna love his dialogue.
You know, man, if we ever make it home, I'm gonna do so much fucking cocaine. I'm gonna rape so many fine bitches. Be like, what time is it? 5 o'clock? Time to go rape me some fine bitches.
Oh yeah, totally. Like 5 o'clock. Bitch raping time.
Lawrence Fishburne also gets some really great lines in this movie.
You in my house, motherfucker!
Besides the entertaining performances and the sometimes hilarious dialogue, I think what really drives the cast home is that, during the third act especially, they all get their own special moment to shine. Well, most of them anyway. Brody gets to fight a predator, the Russian goes out with a bang, Goggins has an amazing death scene where he shanks a predator to death.
Die, you street faggot! Who you think you're dealing with, huh? Is that all you got?
And then there's this scene, where the Yakuza character in the cast has a samurai duel with a predator. It's a scene that's beautifully shot, and the fight is completely badass. Whether you like this movie or not, this is one of the best scenes in a Predator movie ever. This scene alone is enough to make me love the movie. But a great cast, entertaining characters, and a handful of memorable scenes is not what makes this a good Predator movie. It's how it treats the legacy of the franchise and how it handles the Predator itself. This movie respects that the reason the Predator alien worked in the original is because he was in a jungle, and it doesn't try to fuck with that. Unlike other sequels, the callbacks to the original in this movie feel natural and warranted rather than just pure fan service. There's a scene where Isabel reveals to the rest of the team that she knew of the Predator, and she goes on to briefly describe the events of the first movie. This scene confirms that not only is the movie a sequel, but it's also a sequel that tries to build upon the mythos of the original instead of ignoring it. This scene also paves the way for more natural visual callbacks during the third act. For example, when Adrien Brody covers himself in mud to fight a predator, instead of feeling like a forced moment of fan service, it feels natural and warranted because he was previously told that's how it was beaten before. Predators retains enough elements from the original to make it feel familiar, but it never relies on those elements as a crutch, and it ultimately carves its own path. Like the original, there's a team of soldiers, but the dynamic here is completely different. None of them know each other, and they are all suspicious of each other. The macho camaraderie of the original made the movie feel like a fun action blockbuster, but the disarray of the team here means the movie has to take itself more seriously. And while this does mean that Predators lacks the energy of the original, I feel it makes up for that in tension. This movie could have taken a lazy route. It could have simply tried to recreate the same energy of the original, but as we saw with Shane Black's reboot, that doesn't really work. The movie is also committed to raising the stakes and expanding the fiction of the world in a way that makes sense. They could have just retreaded this same plot of the original, but instead they make the jungle an alien hunting ground, where the characters have to deal with different alien species, multiple predators, and crazy people like Lawrence Fishburne. As a result, the story here is an entirely different beast. It's not always done perfectly, but you can't say that they didn't try something new. This movie also provides the most natural expansion of the Predator lore that we've gotten since the end of Predator 2. The Predators are a species of hunters, so why wouldn't they have their own planet dedicated to hunting selected prey? The Predators have always been associated with tribalism, so it makes sense that if there were different species of Predator, that they would be divided into tribes based on genetic hierarchy. And obviously, Predators of different tribes will fight each other, because tribes. Also, I didn't mean to glaze over this, but we get to see two Predators fight each other in this movie, and it's actually a pretty exciting scene. That's two awesome scenes this movie has that no other Predator sequel can top. It also gives us a peek into the other species that the Predator hunts, and it reinforces the idea from the first movie that they understand honorific one-on-one combat. The movie also gets the aesthetic right. The costumes and the makeup of the Predators are great. With the exception of the terrible bug-like face of the Super Predator, all of the designs for the Predators in this movie are fantastic. That also goes for every other Predator-related prop or set. The best part of all of this escalation and expansion is that it never once diminishes what the Predator is. The movie gives us enough new information to expand the world, but not enough to take away the mystery and fear that the Predator invokes. The Predators are never put in ridiculous situations that make them look silly rather than intimidating. The Predator is a sci-fi horror icon, and the movie treats it that way. Even if you disagree with me about the entertainment value of this movie, the way this movie deftly handles the franchise roots while building upon its legacy is worthy of some praise. Out of every Predator sequel, this is perhaps the one that actually adds something substantial to the ideas of the Predator rather than detracting from them. Predators is worth revisiting and worth re-evaluating as a sequel that did not deserve the harsh treatment it got from some fans. I think the best way to describe Predators is a movie with great ideas and mediocre execution. If you're a Predator fan, it's not offensively bad. It doesn't disrespect the character of the Predator. It just suffers from some subpar filmmaking. And all things considered, that's a lot better than its competition. I'm Randall the Vandal, and thank you for watching.